I know how FDR felt when he had to put up with all the contraptions to get around. By the way, if you all did not see the remarkable documentary done by Ken Burns on the Roosevelts, I'm sure it will be shown again, but you must see that. These are three great Americans, and Franklin D. Roosevelt was my all-time hero because he might have saved my life, as a matter of fact. See, I was a child of the Great Depression. My father was a printer and a linotype operator. Out of work for 4 years during the Great Depression. The only job he was able to finally get was on the WPA. That is a Roosevelt program, of course. All of you need to learn about the New Deal. I mean, there's a great many things that have been written in the history books of this country, but none make any more, have more great value in the state. Just think of, in the history of this country, just think of Social Security, minimum wage, 40-hour work week. Good gracious, you can just go on and on and on. And if Roosevelt had been able to convince a few more people in Congress, he would have put through healthcare, universal health care, long before poor Barack Obama's had to contend with the forces that he had. I'm not going to speak about what the forces are, but I have my own feelings about that. I can't go too much further without, it's been mentioned, my dear wife, Gloria, because what you saw us in, when I was still in the Navy, after we were married, San Francisco, mind you. Would you believe, 71 years ago. She had come out there, I was commissioned my ship, and we put it ready, and we had 3 months together. She watched me sail out under the Golden Gate Bridge. Think of that, mind you. In 1943, my ship was gone for 2 years. We did get to have a brief visit back in the States, taking back a damaged cruiser. But she has been with me, and I'm delighted to have this sweet, dear person here tonight. There's a whole table full of minors over there. I'm not going to go through all that, but they range all the way from grandchildren to sons. I wish that I could have had. We have 4 great-grandchildren, and one of them we call Queen Anne. When she comes over to the house, I mean, she just takes over, and they call me Billy, all the great-grandchildren, but she comes in here a couple of weeks ago, and they were rushing me to go somewhere, and she said, come on, Billy, and so anyway, she is such a dear, but I have to say something about Hank Klibanoff. We ran him out of this state back in the 70s. He's just still a child, and now he comes back with a Pulitzer Prize, and he has 3 daughters and who are up in their 20s. He's been editor or managing editor of some of the greatest newspapers in the country, and he's at Emory now. But you must, I entreat you to read The Race Beat. That's the book he and Gene Roberts did that won the Pulitzer Prize 4 years ago. This is the anthem, the signature book done about covering the civil rights movement. And they worked on that book for, goodness gracious, 12 years at least. It is a remarkable work. John Lewis will be up shortly. First time I ever saw John Lewis, he was getting off a bus here in Jackson at the Trailways bus station. Behind him, as he was getting off, was a young National Guardsman with a bayonet stuck in John's back. Think of that. Welcome to Mississippi, the hospitality state. And of course, John did not know it at the time, but he had reservations at a wonderful hostelry located in the Delta named Parchman Penitentiary. I mean, it would be a life's ambition for anyone to go to that Parchman Penitentiary. And of course, back in those days, it's now looks different, but I'm sure it had. I used to interview prisoners who they used what they called the Black Annie. It was a whip. It was a thick, 6-inch wide, inch thick leather whip that they would whip the prisoners with. And I crusaded against that for years. Finally, they got rid of it. And I mean, it's hard to think that, I mean, they're talking now about corporal punishment in children, but when these prisoners were stretched out on the ground and beaten, this affected their lives for eternity. But this I've seen in right at the 70 years I've been covering this crazy state, and I have to say it is because nothing seems to change a great deal. When I came here for the Times-Picayune in 1947, Hank has already mentioned in 1947 that, and it's true that the Theodore Bilbo, you know, a lot of you here, I'm sure, have never heard the name Theodore G. Bilbo, but it's just hard to imagine what a terrible racist United States Senator he was, mind you, but he represented this state, and he had held governor's office, and I mean, that's unfortunately our trouble in this state. We're last in the country, and we elect the leadership to keep us last. That's the sad thing. I saw William Winter a little earlier. I hope he got back. There is a rare natural resource for the state of Mississippi. It would be great the longer he can live. It's wonderful that he and Mrs. Murley Evers have sort of teamed up on things. Incidentally, Murley Evers is a remarkable person. I would say if you could put Murley Evers in the Congress of the United States, she could change this country in a hurry. I've seen a lot, of course, in my many years of covering this state. None is really worse than some of the things I do remember about them. One was during the 60s, an attempted voter march. Now think of that. I mean, here you had to march to get the right to vote in this state. Incidentally, John Lewis wrote a wonderful op-ed piece in the New York Times back a few months ago comparing the voter ID movement that's going on to the poll tax. I can see it. Incidentally, I donated my poll tax receipt from the 1960s that I had kept to the new Civil Rights Museum, which is going to be built, as in progress now here in Jackson. But that shows you how we still we must confront the same issues that had existed after the Civil War. And every person of black skin in this state has to be a courageous person to live through what has been done to them and to go on with hope. I just, sometimes, I used to cover many civil rights meetings, mass meetings in churches around the state, particularly in the Delta, and I would think later, how could these people continue to keep their hopes that things are going to get better? Because they just don't seem to get better. You might 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 1 step forward and 2 steps back. It's the way the history of this state has gone. The one incident that keeps coming back to my mind was on a voter march. It was an attempted voter march, and in Jackson, downtown in the midsection of Jackson. And it happened that there were these children, who had been given little American flags. They were about to step off when the police came down the line and pulled the American flags out of these little black kids' hands. Some of them held on so tightly that it would pull them up off the ground. And I thought, God, what courage it takes to continue to hold on to this hope that things are getting better. That day, that particular day, I watched the police chase. Rarely, of course, back in those days, did a white person take any part in these demonstrations like that. One of them was John Salter from Tougaloo. And the police chased him up on the porch of this little house on Rose Street and hit him over the head with a club that was as big as a baseball bat. The thought hit me then, I said, when it hit his skull so hard, how can this man survive? It sounded like Joe DiMaggio knocking a home run out of the New York Yankees stadium. But it had upset me so much to go back. Hank has mentioned about the press room at the Capitol. That's why we worked out of back in those days. On my way back to write my story, I just felt I had to do something just to get closer to the Lord. So I went into St. Peter's Cathedral downtown. Spent an hour just quietly meditating and saying, things have to get better. And being thankful also that I could survive. And I'm thankful that I have been able to survive to this point. And I hope if I can, to keep writing as long as I have 2 fingers and can pick out some columns on the computer. But this state deserves sympathy, but it deserves leadership, and that is something that is terribly short supply. The organizations like the Mississippi Center for Justice have long been needed in this state, and thank God that it's thriving and now has brought hundreds of people into realize what the meaning of justice is. And let's spread social justice in this state. And I thank everyone in the Center for Justice who supported me to win this recognition. It feels good to be able to see it.